Remember the favor from CM Punk, the build up to WrestleMania 41, going all the way back to Survivor Series? It was one of the more interesting pieces leading into WrestleMania of what this favor was going to be all about. And I thought the ending to WrestleMania 41, the triple threat, I thought having Paul Heyman turn on CM Punk and Roman Reigns siding with Seth Rollins was such an awesome ending and awesome finish. That feeling of didn't see it coming, the excitement, just making it feel special. But we found out more details about this whole favor and kind of an alternate timeline of what we could have seen. And this all came up in the WWE Netflix docuseries called Unreal. So this is a warning. This is a spoiler warning. We're gonna talk about elements in here from WWE Unreal. So if you haven't seen it yet, then just come back later. So as we said, the favor was created around Survivor Series last year, just after Bad Blood. Survivor Series was going to be the War Games match, but the big deal of that was having Roman Reigns teaming up with CM Punk and them having to coexist inside War Games. You had the really cool cinematic sit down between Punk and Roman Reigns and Paul Heyman sandwiched in the middle. And the first favor was going to be Heyman wanting CM Punk to come and help Roman Reigns. And as a favor to Paul Heyman, CM Punk did it. He showed up in War Games. They won the War Games match, and you did have the moment at the end of War Games as CM Punk came out of the cage and said this to Paul Heyman. We know each other. So as time went on, we had the Royal Rumble. CM Punk seemed like he was destined to win that thing, but Jey Uso ended up winning the Royal Rumble, and we'll talk about that. And CM Punk's elimination in the Royal Rumble, that was the big starting point for this triple threat, or the idea of a triple threat between Punk, Seth, and Roman. We then got the cage match between Seth and Punk and the debut episode of Raw on Netflix. And then we just got right onto the road to WrestleMania, with Punk losing at Elimination Chamber, and it was full steam ahead to Mania 41. And remember, Punk's favor that he cashed in from Paul Heyman was to have Paul Heyman come out with him and be his manager for the match at Mania for the triple threat and not go with Roman Reigns. But the original plans for Punk, the favor, we found out more about this in the Unreal docuseries. So the original plan for CM Punk last year was going to be a one-on-one match against Gunther. If you remember, there was also news months ago or even last year, but pre-Mania, where it was Gunther and Punk having live show matches against each other, non-televised matches, leading people to believe that we were going to get Punk versus Gunther at some point. And if we went down the path of Punk and Gunther just as the match for WrestleMania, it seems like on the other side, it could have been Roman versus Seth one-on-one at WrestleMania. But the interesting piece with this favor is the timeline, is that by the time of Survivor Series, when the favor was first introduced, and Punk just threw it out there that they would cash in that favor at some point, the seeds had been planted. Punk never really talked about it until it was ultimately revealed really close to WrestleMania. So I still think that if they went down this alternate universe path of having CM Punk versus Gunther one-on-one, potentially for the World Heavyweight Championship, as Gunther was world champion when he went up against Jey Uso, and that ended up being the match. If it was Punk and Gunther, Punk could have still cashed in the favor of Paul Heyman to be in his corner. Because if Punk and Roman were not supposed to be in the same match originally, they weren't going to be in the same match together, you couldn't just really leave that whole favor thing just out there. Maybe it could have been post-Mania, and then we start getting into the Roman CM Punk story, the Paul Heyman turn and all of that. They could have done a couple of different things here to keep it interesting. CM Punk could have cashed in that favor of having Paul Heyman in his corner in a match against Gunther. And then it would have been really interesting if Punk was the one who picked up the world championship and beat Gunther, and no turn from Paul Heyman with CM Punk. Just the one-off favor. It's what CM Punk wanted in potentially one of the main events of WrestleMania last year. On Roman and Seth's side though, if that was the match, that one's interesting because it feels like that could have played out very much the way it did with the triple threat. You could have had Heyman with Punk on night one and then Heyman with Roman on night two. And during the build to WrestleMania, I can see where they could have still layered in the animosity, the tension of Paul Heyman playing both sides, being in Punk's favor, being in Roman's favor as well. And then the X factor of Seth Rollins. So all that manipulation talk and like how everything kind of built to Mania 41 in the end, I think you still could have got there more or less. But if you had a Roman Seth match one-on-one, would have been awesome and well deserving of a main event slot. But in that match, in that world, you still could have had Paul Heyman turn on Roman Reigns, hitting Roman with the low blow, Paul Heyman giving Seth Rollins the chair shot to Roman Reigns, all symbolizing the Shield and the years of animosity, deception, betrayal, everything together. Seth could have still convinced Paul Heyman in the build up to WrestleMania to turn, playing the mind games. Those little hints and subtleties that we saw along the way in the build to 41. But what if the favor for Punk wasn't just as simple as, I want Paul Heyman in my corner? Because maybe that's not enough. Because even as we had it in the build to Mania 41 for the triple threat, there was so much talk of what this favor could be. And Paul Heyman presented in the contract signing that CM Punk, you will get the main event of WrestleMania. But then needing to add in Paul Heyman siding with Punk for the entrance and being in his corner and not Roman Reigns. So they could have done a different favor with all of this through Paul Heyman. If Punk and Gunther was the match, it could have been Paul Heyman needing to give CM Punk the main event of WrestleMania and not giving it to Roman and Seth. So you create even more tension long-term post-Mania 41. And if you did that and you had Punk and Gunther main event night 1 for the world title, Roman and Seth might have opened night 1 or opened night 2 or middle of the card, because we had Cena and Cody definitely locked in as the main event. What's interesting in the Unreal series is when they're sitting in the production meeting and they're talking about the Royal Rumble. When Punk first returned, tore his tricep during the Royal Rumble, didn't win, Cody won, and they had to pivot a bunch of the story because of the injury. The following year's Royal Rumble, Punk did make it all the way through, and in that production meeting, they did go around to everybody at the table. Triple H asked them, who do you think should win the Rumble? And it seemed almost unanimous that CM Punk was going to win the Royal Rumble, until one person mentioned, what about Jey Uso? Because they looked at the popularity of Jey as it was rising, and they thought that would be a really cool moment to have Jey win the Royal Rumble, go to WrestleMania, put the rocket onto Jey Uso, and get him a world title win over Gunther. And even that story piece was interesting in the series about how they kind of touched on Jey maybe or maybe not being ready for that spot. That the build to the WrestleMania match between him and Gunther was a little rocky at some point, which I think a lot of fans noticed too, that it went on for a very long time and some weeks were not that enthralling and not that engaging for a storyline. And then it started to pick up at the very end. So that pivot to insert Jey and to have the match with Jey and Gunther for the world title completely shifted everything, and then we ended up with that triple threat, and it was amazing. What's neat too is how it all kind of keeps going up until now, where when we're recording this, we're coming up to SummerSlam, and at SummerSlam we are getting Gunther versus Punk one-on-one for the world title. Roman's in a tag team match with Jey, and Seth Rollins is out with injury. Now with Seth Rollins right now, he's either legit injured or they are playing with this as a story piece to then have him show up, cash in Money in the Bank or something big. Let's assume Seth is legitimately injured. I could see that they would have had plans for Roman and Seth one-on-one. So for all three guys to basically have their original WrestleMania matches, but now at SummerSlam, and we're getting one of them. The alternate universe plan here is interesting to me because we could have had, like we said, the turn of Paul Heyman turning his back on Roman Reigns, siding with Seth Rollins getting his group together with Braun and Bronson Reed stealing the shoes of Roman Reigns. It all could have happened still. We wouldn't have made a difference. And we could end up at SummerSlam with Roman versus Seth with Paul Heyman in Seth Rollins' corner. Now, the other possible scenario is that if the original plans worked out the way they did, you could have had a rematch of Roman and Seth at SummerSlam if they went off and had their original planned match at Mania. But things could have also been flipped around where you ended up with the triple threat, the WrestleMania triple threat, but at SummerSlam. Because if you went with all of this, would you have Punk, World Heavyweight Champion, going to SummerSlam in a triple threat against Seth and Roman? Would Money in the Bank have ended up on Seth Rollins at all? Would Seth be world champion by now? Paul Heyman then siding with Seth as it unfolded at Mania 41. All those pieces kind of coming together in the new triple threat at SummerSlam. The triple threat at SummerSlam, that might have been a more interesting story. I kind of like it because you would have had all these different pieces unfolding. Punk with the world title, Seth and Roman doing their thing at Mania, culminating a new triple threat match at SummerSlam because of all of those pieces that fell into place. So my question to you is, do you like the original plan? Punk versus Gunther, Seth versus Roman potentially? The fallout of the Royal Rumble? I don't know where Jey Uso would have been in all of this either. Or do you like how everything did unfold? They went with Jey Uso to win the Royal Rumble, to get the world title match against Gunther, and the triple threat between Punk and Seth and Roman. The giant turn of Paul Heyman. I mostly find it interesting how that came to be in the production meetings with WWE, what they showed us at least. Comment below your thoughts on the whole favor, how the story unfolded, and your thoughts on the Unreal series too. Thanks so much for watching. Have a great day. See ya.